joining us. So good morning. And I'm going to call roll just so Connie makes sure she has everybody. Sandra,
I'm here.
Robin,
Here.
Harry,
I'm here.
Lori Crum, I think she's not going to be here. Monica,
Hello.
Sarah,
Present.
Mike Brower,
Here.
Mike Kagi. See, Mike Keith, I know, is not going to be able to join us, and Jason.
Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining in. And today's meeting, basically an update, and then we will have a presentation by Dan Tasset, just kind of an overview of an in-person presentation that he and some other national leaders will make, and either probably be at the October meeting when that happens. But I invited Dan to give an overview of maybe some of the things that he's seen that are very innovative. And so we'll have him present and then address any other questions that the committee might have. I will remind you that the next couple meetings will be probably tied up for at least the 4-hour allocation, maybe even more, as we review and award the RFPs that are out there. I know Krista and Sunflower have been doing lots of work with those RFPs. So with that, I will turn to the next item on the agenda is the board minutes, the approval of our last meeting. So if you've had a chance to peruse those, I will look for a motion to approve.
This is Sandra. I make that motion.
Have a second?
Monica,
This is Robin, second.
look at all of us. We are helpful, aren't we? Whoever wants it.
First and second, any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. Minutes are unanimously approved. The next item on the agenda is an update from the Attorney General's office, and we'll turn to Chris for that. Chris, you want to bring us up to speed, what's going on there and the flow of the funding, et cetera?
Thank you, Pat. And just making certain everybody can hear me. I think we're good. Okay, so apologies all for not being there in person. I was just traveling earlier this week and managed to go ahead and pick up the airport flu, I think. So not a huge update from the AG's office. I did want to take one moment, though, here kind of at the start of the meeting to commemorate the fact that this is our 1-year anniversary as a board. The exact 1-year anniversary, in fact, our first meeting last year was July 14th, 2022. So congratulations, everybody, for making it through one whole year as a board. Couple real quick reminders. If you have not returned your conflicts list and form into Connie, please get that done. I think we have just about everybody. I'm not sure if we're missing anybody at this point, but please do get that done as soon as possible. With respect to the settlements, not a lot of action has happened in the last month. We do anticipate a payment from the distributors sometime this month. I will advise, and that'll be a fairly substantial multi-million-dollar payment. And after that point, we'll do a distribution to the cities and counties. I will advise the board at this point that as of the last update that I have received, Mallinckrodt, which, if you all remember, had declared bankruptcy, and we were receiving payments as part of their restructuring plan did delay a payment to the states by a few weeks. That was a negotiated agreement between the states and Mallinckrodt. I have not received an update yet that they have actually made that payment, but just be aware that we are monitoring that situation and will take action as necessary to preserve our rights to that settlement. But if you recall last year, we talked about how the bankruptcies were a source of uncertainty about the actual end of the day dollar amounts that the state would actually receive. That uncertainty is starting to become more visible and more acute. So we are monitoring that situation, and I'll advise the board at a later date if anything else changes in that situation with Mallinckrodt. Finally, as we get towards discussion about grant applicants and evaluating different grant applications, I do want to just advise the board about just being aware of your language choices. One of the things that we want to always be aware of when we're talking about any organization, this is more for next month, and you'll hear a similar warning or advice next month. But as we're discussing any grant applicant, we do want to be aware that any evaluation of the application is an evaluation of that particular application's fitness for that RFP. And when we're having conversations about those applicants, that is the way to think about these things. It's not an evaluation of the particular organization or people involved in the organization or anything like that. It is purely an evaluation of the grant application and its fitness for that particular RFP. And so we just want to be very cautious when we're speaking in this public setting and on this public record to be aware when we're talking about these entities that applied for funding that is how we are evaluating these particular grants. I believe that's all we've got from the AG's office. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you, Chris. Any questions for Chris? Chris, I should know this, but I don't. The amounts that the cities and counties have received to date, is that posted on our website, or is that information available?
We're working to get that information put out in a way that's more convenient than the annual report that we have. I don't believe the annual report is on the website. It's an open record, but I don't believe it's on the website currently, as we were working through a couple minor corrections that needed to be done on that report. But what we are working to update the AG's office website. That's been an ongoing project. And when we finally get that updated, our intent is to produce some kind of tool or database or something to that effect that people can go look at the particular subdivision and figure out how much they've received in real time.
Okay. The board might recall that 25% of the funding that the state receives will go to cities and counties that have made, I don't know if there's an application, but they certainly had to sign up for that. And so several entities that I've conversed with, I encourage them to look at their community, because it might be a source of funding for some of the things that they're wanting to do. And one of the things that I would hope for in the future as we look at ways to award grants and fund different initiatives would be perhaps partnering with the locals and being able to maximize the funding that's out there. So appreciate your work there, Chris, on making those lists available as we move forward.
And Pat, I will tell you, we are in the early stages of working on some more detailed guidance and information for the cities and counties so that they can discover new strategies or approaches that they hadn't otherwise considered for how to utilize those funds. And one other thing is that whenever we do a distribution, the actual calculation, the table of that actual calculation should be made public both on our website and through the Association of Counties and the League of Municipalities. That'll be distributed to the individual cities and counties. But just one thing, just since I know this is a thing people can view online, I do want to make it particularly clear. The cities and counties that are participating in our settlement is set. The new cities and counties cannot sign up or anything like that. That was established based on a sign-on procedure that happened from the end of 2021 through about the middle of 2022, or excuse me, the end of no, it was the end of 2021 through about the middle of 2022. So we have about 200 or so cities or counties, including covering about 95% of the population of the state. So generally speaking, for most people, they are probably in a covered city or county.
Thank you.
Chair George, this is Sarah Kaler, and I actually represent the municipalities for the state of Kansas. And it should be noted that I know when we talk about 25%, that seems like a huge number, but it is a funding formula. And so many of our cities are really receiving small amounts. I mean, it's $1,000, it's $1,500. And so they're not looking at, I mean, I sit with my colleagues across the state. Many of those cities, I mean, it's not a substantial amount of money. And I do appreciate the guidance that is being given to municipalities about how to spend that. I don't believe that many cities are rushing to spend. In fact, we've encouraged them at the League of Municipalities not to rush to spend until we kind of figure out how that works. But the reality of it is it's not millions of dollars. In fact, for many municipalities, it doesn't even have a comma in it when the payment doesn't have a comma. So,
if I can follow on that from Sarah, the most recent distribution calculation, which we're waiting for the larger payment in order to do a kind of multi-payment distribution. The most recent payment calculation we did for some of our cities and counties, it's single digit. At least a handful of our cities and counties are looking at receiving $1 or $2 from that particular 25%, because the payment the state received was about $200,000. So it is important to keep that in mind. And Sarah, I appreciate you saying that most of them are kind of just holding the funding for right now. That's consistent with what they reported to us in the annual report. The vast majority of cities and counties are just sitting on the funds for right now until they either acquire more funding in order to do a larger project, or until they can evaluate how to best utilize those funds.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments for Chris? Thank you very much, Chris, for the update. We'll move on to item number 4, which is an update on our fund balances. I think Shauna's going to give us an update on where we stand with funds and anything that we've received, or maybe where our current standings are. So, Shauna, do you want to take over?
Thanks. This is Shanna Zimmer with Sunflower. Chris had asked me to provide y'all with an update of the fund balance since we are at that 1-year anniversary mark. Just refer you to the document in your packet, notating the details from the fund. Just as a reminder, we did receive $34 million back in January on the 9th, $34,482,951.60. Since that January date, we have earned approximately $134,000 in interest. You have made 2 grant payments to Sunflower. If you refer to your packets, those 2 numbers that you've approved previously will add up to the number there that you see on your page. That leaves us with a fund balance as of June 30th of $34,468,271.75. Also, just a reminder that you have approved the needs assessment. So I put a hold on there of that $1.5 million. Nothing's been paid out of that, just more of a heads up that you've earmarked those funds. that leaves the remaining fund balance there of the 32 million. Also, on the back end, our initial understanding of our agreement was security of the funds to reduce risk and maximize our earnings that we could, given those risk parameters. We initially used a checking account with a repo sweep on the back end. The repo sweep was a government securities sweep account, and we earned approximately 1.2% interest on those first few months there. Beginning June 27th, we switched from a repo sweep to a custodian sweep account. In lieu of government securities, we switched to a custodian account that would give us 100% coverage with FDIC insurance. The custodian sweep account takes the total fund balance and it parses those out to amounts of $250,000 or less to a list of 3,000 or so banks that we invest in. So we're able to insure those funds 100%, satisfying the risk and security requirements from the Office of the Attorney General. That also changed our interest rate from approximately 1.2% to 4.35%. So not only do we gain the insurance, but we also gained a much better interest rate, which I think you'll be pleased with as those earnings start to accumulate in the next few months. Just one note to add, after I sent the document and I got access to that backside account, we did earn an approximate $12,000 in the last 4 days of June. So next time I give you an update, you'll see that as well. And then I'll just be tracking this. And of course, the details are always available upon request. If there's any other questions or any questions at all, I would be happy to take those.
Thank you very much, Shannon. Any questions, comments? I know we had some discussion about, you know, the funds and how to hold it, and at the same time, being public funds, that we needed to be safe with it, but also didn't want it to be wasted in its earnings ability. So from what you've just explained, I feel like you're honoring the wishes of the board, and appreciate that. Any other questions or comments? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we'll move on to item 5. Krista, you will give us an update on our RFPs 1 and 2, and also on the needs assessment, where we stand on it. So turned over to you, Krista.
He's pulling out the slides real quick. Either one should be fine. I think I just have it in there with PDF and PowerPoint, either version. I think so, should be fine. Yeah. Okay, so on you guys should have also received these slides, so I'll go ahead and jump in. So the second slide is just kind of a recap of what we received overall for the prevention RFP. So we received 57 applications from 53 different organizations, all from, we had all congressional districts covered from the applications, and all of the priority areas and each strategy under all priority areas had at least one application. This closed on June 23rd, and we received a little over 9 million total requested. And then on the next slide, you'll see the breakdown by the type of organization. This report is very similar to what I shared the first time with treatment. But we had 36 organizations that were nonprofits and 17 that were governmental organizations. The priority areas proposed, these are just number of areas that, a number of strategies per area that were proposed. So it's obviously duplicative. There's 152 for prevention, but that just counts each strategy each time that it's mentioned in each grant. And then providers and health system had 94 strategies proposed, and public safety and first responders had 51. On the next slide, you'll see the breakdown of each of the prevention strategies proposed and how many applications mentioned those. So each of the prevention strategies had at least 12 mentions and applications to be proposed as a strategy to address. On the next slide, you'll see the providers and health system strategies proposed, and each one of these strategies had at least 2 applications, which was great. And then the next slide shows the public safety and first responder strategies proposed, which each had at least one application that proposed that strategy. So it was great to see, again, like treatment, all of the proposed or the allowable strategies had at least one application. The next slide shows the breakdown of applications by the congressional districts. So we had 38 in District 1, the blue area, 23 in District 2, which is green. District 3 had 14, orange, and then the yellow is District 4, had 10 applications in those. And then the next slide, you'll see an update here from the slides I originally sent out. Barber County I meant it to be gray instead of light blue. It's just a minor change. We didn't receive any applications from Barber County. And so you'll see on the slide on screen that that is now gray. The handout I sent before showed as light blue. I just missed that the first time around. But technically, not technically, yes, the only county that didn't have any applications that proposed that county would be Barber, but we did have 14 statewide proposals, so technically they'd still potentially be covered through the statewide proposals. They just didn't have any applications that mentioned them specifically. And then the next slide is just the number breakdown, so you can see the specific number that had proposals for each county to address. And then the next slide is breaking down by treatment and prevention, so the congressional district map showing how many applied for treatment in each district and how many applied for prevention in each district. And then we have 17 applications across the 2 RFPs that applied for 1 or more grants under both RFPs. And then the next slide is the breakdown from the treatment RFP and the prevention RFP applicants broken down by county. So just so you could see those 2 maps together. So the last presentation I provided and then this one. And then the next slide is just an update on where we're standing with the treatment RFP. So the treatment RFP, we completed the reviews. We had 7 reviewers with a mixed level of expertise. We had some that had SUD and opioid-specific expertise, others that had more academic, grant-making, and systems-building kind of expertise so that they can provide more of an objective opinion on the applications as compared to those of us that already have expertise in the area and might overlook some things that maybe weren't fully addressed in the RFP responses. So we had a good mix of different expertise on there. We had 21 applications per all of the reviewers. Brandon had just a few less than everybody else, but everyone else had 21 applications to review. We had 2 reviewers for every application, so we had 2 scores. And then we took those 2 scores to then guide our discussion at our review meeting that we had. We are estimating about 2.5 hours at least were spent on each application, so 1 hour at least per reviewer per application, and then at least 15 minutes to a half hour per our discussions in the meetings. And that doesn't include any of my time like compiling reports and re-reviewing and those kind of things, but just basically so you could get an idea of how long it took. And then we had a 16-hour in-person consensus meeting on June 19th and 20th. So where all the reviewers, we all got together. We talked about every single grant application and the strengths and weaknesses and the scores that were provided by each reviewer and the average score. And then we came up with a final consensus score across all reviewers. And we all agreed on each score for all of the applications. And now I'm working on putting together summary reports for you all that I'll get to you by the 28th that will provide a summary of all the applications and the scores and all sorts of things. I'll show you on the next slide after this what that will include. And then we'll, of course, discuss all of that in August. So hopefully you'll have some time to look at the summary reports before the August meeting. And then you also have all of the access to all the applications in the portal now. So you guys should be able to log in and see the actual application from every grantee and the budget they submitted with their grant. So that's in the system. Connie sent out an email recently about how to log in if you need any help with that. Kelly Mark can help with Sunflower. And then the next slide is the summary report item. So this is what I have right now in the summary reports of different components. So right now, it's looking like we have obviously the applicant organization, the amount they requested, the congressional districts they cover, the priority elements, so the big priority areas that they've addressed, the title of the project, a project summary, a really brief summary of the project, the consensus score range. Instead of the specific scores, some of it will list their range. And then we range them by highest score to lowest score based on like the cumulative amount. So if you were to fund, say, 1 through 15, that equals 3 million. I'm just making that up. That is one range, and then double that is the next range. So of course, when you see it, it'll make a lot more sense, but just that's what we mean by range. Application strengths and weaknesses, just a summary of those from the review process. We'll have a column where it's kind of questions for the board to consider or any kind of concerns that might have arose, or things like if they need a budget revision or if it looks like a pass-through entity, those kind of things will have its own column, or if there are any financial concerns. That will be in there. And then the strategies that they've addressed, and then the strategy areas that they've addressed. And then counties served in their budget summaries. So I found while putting these reports together, the budget summaries are actually the most, they make the most sense to actually describe the project more so than some of the project titles and summaries. So I've gone back and revised some of that to try to make sure that it's clear in the summaries of their projects that it's understood what the project is, because some of them don't quite match 100%. And then the last slide, really quick, needs assessment is still in progress. It's still going. We haven't released an RFP. We hope to do that early August. And then we'll keep you updated as we go. We haven't made a ton of progress on that just yet, but more to come next month, hopefully. And any questions?
Thank you, Krista. Any questions, comments?
Or if anything I missed on the summary reports, if you guys would like me to add anything in, let me know.
I feel that it's very extensive. It illustrates the great job you and the AG's office did in disseminating the information. You know, I think that's reflected that we have the entire state covered as far as having the opportunity to submit for the funding that we're entrusted with, and certainly appreciate the review process and that expertise that Sunflower has brought to the table here, and look forward to the summary report and actual awarding some of the dollars out there as we get started on perhaps the exciting part of what we've been kind of building up to. I know it's, as Chris stated, it's to the day 1 year anniversary, and in some ways, you know, we're just getting started, but we had to do a lot of this work so to make sure that we're responsible and also that we're effective. So any other comments or questions for Krista? Well, thank you, and thank Sunflower in general for the work that they've provided and the guidance that they've given to the board and to me. Our next item, 6, I mentioned that Dan Tasset agreed to make a presentation today, very much a summary presentation. Dan has testified before Congress and presented at numerous national forums, conferences, mainly under the guise of his initial work in public or in physical health, but has turned a lot of his attention and his company's attention towards mental health in general, and some specifically with substance use disorder, and has been very innovative and has worked with many innovative entities around the nation, actually around the world. And so I asked him if he could just give us a kind of whet our appetite, so to speak, on things that we could be thinking about and looking for as we enter the next phase, which is looking at innovation and looking to maybe spur some action here in the state of Kansas that, you know, can be perhaps a leader in what's going on. Unfortunately, the opportunity to help people keeps increasing. Myself being in recovery, I spend considerable amount of my time just working with alcoholics and addicts and get pulled into situations as I did recently in a part of our state that's rural is an understatement, but they had concern of the number of overdoses and suicides taking place amongst their young people. And that's the area that we have an opportunity to hopefully turn the tide on. It's getting worse instead of better. So Dan, thank you for appearing before our committee today, and just turned it over, and Dan will spend a little bit of time summarizing some of the things that he's seen, and then we'll have him back here in a couple of months, and certainly we'll have time for Q&A when Dan gets done here. So Dan, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. So let me start with a recommendation, Pat. Since I grew up in Southwest Kansas with you, I would recommend you do a different background, because I'm pretty sure there's not that many trees in Southwest Kansas combined, let alone in your backyard. So just a thought. But
well, you haven't been here. You don't know that I got a forest I planted out here.
So good, good morning, everybody. Let me just give you a little quick background on myself, and then kind of tell you what I'd like to hopefully accomplish at Pat's request here in 10 or 15 minutes. I am a fourth generation Kansan. We and grew up in a farming community, have 10 siblings, or 11 kids in the family. So I was down towards the bottom. So I had to get out the farm or get away from farming because there was no room left for me by the time I graduated. So fortunately and unfortunately, I love the farming environment, but I've been in venture capital, private equity for most of my career. Let me put everybody at ease. I'm not going to be applying for a grant, and I won't be responding to an RFP. I'm not asking for money, and I'm not selling anything. I'm here just to, at Pat's request, because he's been a lifelong friend. And as he said, we've had some pretty good success innovating. I'm not sure. I think that mostly comes from my DNA, coming from the German immigrant, or fourth generation German immigrant. But we've had some real success in innovation, particularly in healthcare. And I think that's what I'm going to talk about. So what I'd really like to do is I'd like to just in 10 minutes, try to get you to think differently, potentially, about behavioral health and healthcare in general. And that might influence you a little, your thinking regarding what type of RFPs you would put out and how you would respond to different grant applications, and how you would look at the money that you're spending. So that really is my goal for today, is just maybe have a change or a mindset, adding something to the way you guys have been thinking. Haven't been a part of your meetings, but so let me kind of start with, when I talk about healthcare, I'm going to talk about it. It means both behavioral health, substance abuse, and physical health. So healthcare in general, when I talk about that, just know that it is all encompassing, includes everything that you're talking about as well. So the biggest problem that we believe, and we have had success working against, is that healthcare, our system, is generally broken. I think the data is very specific, and it shows that it's broken, and we are in dire need of a significant transformation of our healthcare delivery system, again, which includes both physical health and behavioral health. I'll give you an example of other industries that have been transformed through innovation. And it's the similar sort of thought process that we have been using in healthcare innovation. probably 4 years ago, I was at a hotel, and my youngest of 9 children, my daughter wanted to go to a zoo, so I said, let's go to a zoo. And went outside, got a taxi cab. The taxi cab was dirty, had the window down, no air conditioning. We were in Florida somewhere, I can't remember exactly, in Florida. And we got to the zoo, dropped us off. We went to the zoo. And when we got ready to leave, I called the taxi cab company on my cell phone. And while we were waiting on the taxi cab company, people walked by us getting into these other vehicles, black SUVs, and driving off. And that happened 2 or 3 times. My daughter disgustingly said, why don't we just call Uber? And I said, well, I've heard of that. I don't really know what that is. And she said, give me your phone. And this is an absolute true story. Before the taxi cab got there, she downloaded Uber, the app, and got a car there, and we rode back. The cost back to the hotel was cost was less expensive. The ride was air conditioning, and the car was clean. Less expensive, higher quality, better experience, at a lower cost. That's value in ride sharing. I can give you same examples in iTunes. Used to be that you had to go to some place and buy an entire album if you only wanted one song of Leonard Skinner or Led Zeppelin, the songs that Pat still listens to. Now you can just order a single song on iTunes. Same thing with movies, consumer goods. I haven't been to a mall in 5 years. If I want a pair of shoes, I get on Amazon. Every industry has been transformed. And the problem with healthcare is healthcare has not been. The problem is the way healthcare is both consumed and the way it's paid for. Because every other industry, the way consumer goods are concerned, music, books, movies, ride sharing, the way that is consumed and the way it's paid for has been transformed. But in healthcare, that journey is just beginning. So that's the mindset I'd like to start with. The problem is the way healthcare is consumed and the way it's paid for. So let me just dive in and give you an example in healthcare. And I'm going to relate it to the industry that Pat used to be in the car business. So can you imagine buying an engine for an automobile, buying the body from somebody else, buying the tires from somebody else, buying every other component, bringing it to yet another place, have it assembled, paying for it, and if it breaks down a week later, you have to do the whole thing all over again and pay for it. Almost sounds absurd and sounds ridiculous. Yet in healthcare, that is precisely what is happening. If you want to have, I'll take physical health example for a minute. If you want to have a total hip replaced or a total knee replacement, you have a surgeon, you have an anesthesia provider, you have physical therapy for afterwards, you go to a location, you pay everybody separately, and if it doesn't work, you have to pay for it all over again and start from ground zero. That is the problem with healthcare, the way healthcare is consumed and the way it's paid for. Again, that journey of transformation is beginning and starting. There's 3 fundamental things I would love for you guys to think about as you think about future RFPs or future grant applications. I heard you talk a little bit about 2 buckets, prevention and treatment, as being separate RFPs. But I want to try to see if I can change the way you think about it in total. The transformation in every other industry, and it's beginning in healthcare right now, begins with empowering the consumer of whatever the industry you're in. In this case, of course, the consumer of behavioral health or the consumer of physical health. Empowering the consumer and getting the consumer to care as much about quality as they do at cost, as they do convenience. What we call empowering the consumer, giving them the tools with which to make decisions and getting them to care about value. Every one of us in this room, when we consume consumer goods, or we buy music, or buy a movie, or buy an automobile, whatever it might be, we always take three things into consideration. The quality of what we're buying, the goods or service, how it makes us feel, the convenience or whatever it makes us feel when we're, and the third is the cost. Yet in healthcare, that it doesn't apply. So number one transformation that we need to be thinking about is how do we empower the consumer, the patient, number one, and how do we get them to care about the total value equation, meaning clinical quality, convenience, access, and cost. Number two, if we accomplish the first, and I'm going to give you some examples of how we're accomplishing that already. Number two, if we can accomplish the first, getting the consumer empowered, which means a lot of things. What is it going to cost me, and understanding, and the transparency of pricing, and all those kinds of things. If we can empower them and get them to care about the overall value equation, that will then force the providers of healthcare to compete on value. And they're not competing on value today. When a provider has to start competing on value, then he begins to care about other factors, not just what they're doing for that particular event. So let me give you an example. So as we start in physical health, we started a journey quite a while ago of saying, how can we really deliver a higher value to the consumer and empower the consumer? And I'll break down into cardiovascular care, for an example, or orthopedic care, for an example. So it doesn't do any good for us if we go in and we do surgery on a patient, give the patient painkillers, and then they end up with another event associated with opioid addiction. That doesn't overall, it helps us in the orthopedic, it helps the orthopod in his particular surgery event, because he doesn't care about the opioid addiction. He got paid for what he did. Now, transform for a minute and how we're currently doing this. We as providers, musculoskeletal providers, are now beginning to be responsible for the overall cost of care, a part of the overall cost of care for an employee or a patient or a consumer, as a subset underneath primary care. So if they're responsible for the overall care and their share of the overall, then they do care about opioid addiction. And then they start automatically looking for, well, is there another way to do this? Do I really need to be prescribing opioids, or is there pain control that could happen differently? And they begin to study what is actually causing the pain, and is there a way to prevent? This is real-time data that is being collected right now by providers all over the country because they're having to deliver value, not just getting paid for a particular service line or whatever that might be. Cardiologists and cardiovascular surgeons are beginning to discover, as they take responsibility for the overall care, that if they have a patient between the age of 60 and 70, and they have a behavioral comorbidity called anxiety, that patient is twice as likely to end up in the emergency room if they have some sort of an arrhythmia. So if they're responsible for the overall cost of care to that patient, they are now beginning to pay attention to the behavioral side of care. So I gave you an example in musculoskeletal. I've given you an example in cardiovascular. I could sit here and give you 20, 30 examples of what that looks like. What I'm really encouraging you to do as you start looking at RFPs or grant applications is not just look at what's being done in the prevention space, but what's being done in the treatment space, But if we get providers to take responsibility for the overall cost of care, what would that particular event look like, and how would that be structured and look like? And I would suggest to you that it has to start with primary care and the integration of primary care and behavioral health. And that journey, as you know, has already started. So whenever you look at, I would really encourage you to say, are the primary care physicians in any location across the state of Kansas, wherever that might be, how are they integrating in with behavioral health? Because if they're two complete separate treatment or prevention even, then I would submit to you that we're not looking towards where healthcare should be going. We're looking in the rearview mirror and looking and just continuing to feed a broken system. And so the integration of primary care and behavioral health together does a number of things. It's able to not only say, well, let's integrate and control what the overall needs of the patient are. If they have a propensity for opioid or addiction, then at all costs, we need to avoid prescribing that. We need to go to a different route. And there are physical providers now that now understand even very details about how you can avoid pain, even post-surgery or whatever that might be. For example, I'll go back to the total joint replacement. The length of the time the tourniquet is stepped on the knee, how quickly the patient ambulates is a exact determinant in what the pain score of that patient is going to be on day 2 following surgery. So literally 2 years ago, an orthopedic surgeon couldn't give a rat's ass about the pain score of the patient because he could prescribe opioids. Today, an orthopedic surgeon says, it's really important. I want to look at the data to avoid a high pain score so that I don't have to worry about prescribing the opioid. And so what's driving it? The length of the tourniquet, how quickly a patient ambulates after a total knee replacement. That data is beginning to drive the integration of behavioral health and physical health together. And it is starting at the primary care level. The second thing that the integration of primary care and behavioral health does, it removes the stigma associated with behavioral health, and for sure, the stigma associated with drug and alcohol, substance abuse disorder. And that is probably even more important than the overall integration of care with the patient themselves. So let me just pause there and see if you have any questions. Pat, does it make sense where I'm headed with this? Again, I really would encourage everybody to really think, okay, is there a way where you guys can begin to fund different ways of looking at behavioral health, substance abuse disorder? And I would encourage you to say, if there's not integration at the primary care level in any location, geographic location, you need to potentially, and look, I'm going to get really aggressive on my, and I'll apologize in advance if I offend anyone. But I am so passionate about that our healthcare system can be transformed because I'm beginning to see it work in a lot of different areas. And I would really encourage you to even withhold maybe grant applications for people unless there is some evidence that they're moving in the right direction, which is integration, behavioral health and physical health, starting at the primary care level. Anyway, let me just pause there. See if what I'm saying makes sense. I hope it's not too complex.
Thanks, Dan. And, two things that you hit on, the integration and then stigma. I know when you come back here in a couple of months, we'll dive deeper in actual applications that we, certainly, I think it will help guide us, particularly after we get the needs assessment done. But any questions of Dan from the committee? Dan, if you want to continue, and again, Dan's going to be back and some other national experts, I guess, so to speak, here in a couple months. But you might just, you just hit on stigma, and I know you and I and myself with other people, how stigma really does play a big part, whether it's street drugs and getting help for, your family or your friends. But I was having a conversation with Dan, and I posed something to him about, how do you get this integration when there's still stigma? And he said something that really made a lot of sense to me in regards to the physical health. And I hadn't thought about it, even though I participated in physical education classes when I was a kid in elementary school. And the introduction, I think, if I remember right, President John F. Kennedy introduced physical education in his administration back in the 60s and somewhat removed some of the stigma there. So Dan, if you wanted to spend a couple minutes on that, and then we'll call it good.
Yeah, so, let me back up and tell you why I'm so passionate about what we're doing here, because we've started with in several different markets in the Northeast, in the Chicago area, Florida, Texas, starting the process with a overall paying attention to the overall value delivered to individual employees working with self-funded employers. So start with that. So we would say, let us be responsible for, I'm going to be real cautious about using the term population health management, because it sounds like you're trying to boil the ocean, and to a certain extent you are. But when we started working with large employers or even small, medium-sized employers, and we brought in a primary care group that could accommodate their employee base, and then the primary care group started to dictate specialty care, we actually missed behavioral health integration. We actually said, okay, if somebody's got a problem, look, let's send them traditionally, just like everybody does. Got to send them, somewhere else. What we found is that because of the stigma, we through our research and through our annual risk assessment of the employees, we found they just didn't want to go because of the stigma associated with it. So we said, okay, all right, we won't worry about it. Then we started studying the data, and the data became so significant. If we were forced, if we're going to take risk associated with the overall care of a patient, we were forced to look at the risks associated with behavioral mental health, which obviously includes substance abuse disorder. And we started retroactively going back and studying the data. For example, we knew that if a patient even started to take, or an employee started to take some sort of pain medication, even something as simple as ibuprofen, that it became a predictor that they were at some point going to have surgery. And then it became a predictor that they were, depending on other social determinants, that they were going to become an opioid addict. And then it was going to cost us on the behavioral health side. I gave you an example in cardiovascular. So what we started to do was we started to say, look, this patient's going to end up in the ER, whatever it might be, regardless of what. So let's start up front and let's start. So what we did was we insisted that we would bring in behavioral health into the primary care physician. So the outside of the primary care physician's office didn't change. It was still primary care, but integrated in with them, and part of the intake process for all the employees and their dependents was questions around mental behavioral health. Very simple questions. Do you or do your dependents experience any anxiety or depression from time to time? to your knowledge, or is there any substance that are being used, legal or illegal? Are they on, Adderall? Have they had a prescription for Adderall? Are they using illegal substance, or in many states now legal, marijuana or anything? And through that, we began to integrate behavioral health in with the primary care, and through that process, really removed the stigma. Then what we started to say is, okay, we found out through the data very clearly that there was a huge void for education. Parents knew that, okay, they knew what the obesity meant. They knew what the food pyramid was, and the kids knew the same thing. But when you started to get into behavioral health and mental health, there was such a void of what constitutes anxiety, what constitutes depression, what constitutes any sort of substance abuse disorder whatsoever. At what point does it begin? And that began the process of us trying to get the education system where the kids were educated. We said, well, they're being educated on the food pyramid and a balanced diet. So why are they not couldn't we use the same system to educate them on all the various behavioral health issues that they're having to deal with? And what does that look like? Now, I'd like to report incredible success there, but we're beginning to make progress. So again, it's just another way of thinking about your grant applications or your RFPs, and what you do is it goes back to, I'd like to see you start to integrate in prevention and treatment and get providers to start to integrate that thought process together. It's certainly working in different parts and certainly working in the physical space. And we needed to work in the behavioral health space to integrate those together. And we need to integrate those two in the physical space as well, starting with at the primary care level. Makes sense.
Dan, it's Gary Henson. Thanks for coming. What I hear you saying is, when we evaluate these requests, that we should evaluate them on a continuum of care model. And I don't think you would have that argument from any of us that it should be integrated, from cradle to grave, for lack of a better way to say it. When I look at, and maybe this is for Krista, when I look at the scoring rubric, I don't see a continuum of care scoring component in that rubric. And so is that something that we should consider as we go forward?
So, Gary, I don't know if you remember, but I think we had breakfast one time together.
We did.
Yeah, so go a little deeper on what you just asked, a little deeper on the scoring system, if you would.
Well, if I look at the scoring system goals, needs, resources, sustainability, evaluation, and I read through each of the blocks, they're very comprehensive, and I can see how we can come up with a really good scoring model. But what feels like it might be lacking is that tandem of behavioral health and substance use, something to solve an issue inside of substance use disorder. And based off of your comments, my question is does that need to be in that scoring rubric? And maybe I'm going down a difficult path that is, I guess what I'm saying is, if somebody is putting in, said more plainly, if somebody is putting in a request for naloxone and they need, and this is a pretty silly example because we would want to approve that, right? But that's not a continuum of care. That's not solving the issue today. It's not taking things to another level. It is just simply arming people with something that can prevent overdoses, which is really important. but it's not what you're saying. It doesn't solve a long-term issue.
Right.
Am I hearing it correctly?
Yes, you're dead on. Absolutely.
And I think this next phase, the exciting phases are, as far as I'm concerned, and that's why I thought it was appropriate to have Dan just kind of whet our appetite, with some of the things they've done, initially on the physical health, but now integrating the mental health, but the innovative phase, and plus being armed with our needs assessment so we know what we got out there. And then how can we tie it together? I just had this conversation yesterday. I think we'll be shocked when we see all the resources that are available for substance use care, treatment, what have you, and all the funding that just Kansas has available, but how disparate they are, to Dan's point about how do we tie it together, and not just on the mental health. I mean, that'll be a big accomplishment, but then how do you integrate it on the physical side? And so
I think the big challenge here, Gary, is if you're in a controlled environment and we have an employer with 100,000 employees, and you've got their attention, you can incentivize them in different ways, and you have a controlled environment, you can have a group of primary care, you can integrate behavioral health into primary care. The challenge you have across the whole country that we're all facing is when you have just employees of the population in the state of Kansas spread out and patients spread out across the entire state. How do you accomplish that? And to be honest with you, I don't really have a solution. I'd love to debate and talk about that, some of the technology that we're using and how we do that. But, what does the scoring system look like? But how we take it from just, where it works in a controlled environment, how do you get that to really take off and work across an entire state, and how do you do that? There's so many different components, and I'm sure, Gary, you're right in the middle and know the technology that's out there today to be able to do that. And how do it's a combination of virtual care. I hate it when I hear substance abuse disorder providers that stiff arm any notion of remote or virtual care. I think now that's being less and less. I don't think anybody's beginning to accept that, but I just think that is just a huge mistake. Use the technology. Technology is going to be at the center of fixing and transforming healthcare, behavioral and physical health. So there was a component here I was going to add, if I can just reverberate back for just a minute, regarding how we might look at doing this across the state. I think as we start looking at it almost makes me think that you guys should consider grants or RFPs for the very thing that we're just talking about. Is there a company out there that could integrate into Garden City, Kansas, Dodge City, Liberal, Topeka? Is there a company out there that could bring the integration of primary care and behavioral health providers together? So, and along with empowering the consumer and the patient to do that. So that would not be an RFP for prevention. That would not be an RFP for treatment. That would be an RFP for, I would call it value or something else. Again, we're working in this space, but it's working really, really well. We're getting great outcomes. And we're getting, to your point, Gary, we're getting good sustainability. Let me give you an example. Led by primary care for a controlled employee base or cohort, we're getting the behavioral health providers and specifically substance abuse disorder providers to actually what we're calling take risk on an entire year's worth of care. So our data is beginning to show, rather than paying for 30 days of treatment and then trying to squeeze that down to, you know what, we think you should be able to get your job done in 21 days. And all the substance abuse disorder providers are getting squeezed downward pressure on reimbursement. We're finding that if we say we will pay you, if you'll agree to X dollars for an entire year's worth of treatment, so would we like to see ongoing care beyond a year and 2 years? Yeah, but we got to start somewhere, getting out of this episode of trying to treat drug and alcohol addiction for 30 days and hope that we get, you know, the best outcome we can. Instead, let's pay the provider for the year and have them say, come up with a plan that actually helps this patient for the entire year. It's a combination of maybe intense for the first 30 days, but we want then, give us the solution, give us the remote care. What does that look like? What's the follow-up? What's the support system? What's the social support system? Are you as a provider creating a social support system for that employee? We know they need a social support system and they don't have it. And you know, okay, we want them to go to Alcoholics Anonymous. Great, but you know, can we use technology? Can you use technology as a provider? Since we're paying you for 12 months worth of care for this patient, why are you not providing the technology? Why are you not providing the remote care? Why are you not providing the social support system, even if it's a virtual support system? Why are you know, and so that's how, I guess, how I would think about it. It's how we're thinking about it in a controlled cohort, but I don't know why the same thing wouldn't work on more of a broader base. I guess what I'm doing here and trying to spur thought process and debate, trying to get people to think more innovatively and creatively. I don't know that I have the solution. We found some of them and they're working, but I don't know that I have, but just to spur the debate and the question, the innovation, and not accept the way it's been done in the past. Because if everybody accepted the way it's done in the past, we would still be raising our hand for a nasty yellow taxi to pick us up, or we'd still be walking into the mall to buy a pair of shoes, or we would still be buying an album when we only want, you know, one song. I mean, I can go on and on and on and on, and we got to think, you know, more innovatively and creatively. And I don't even like the term, to be honest with you. I don't like the term thinking outside the box. Healthcare is so regulated, the way it's by our government is so restricted, the way it's paid for. We got to think inside the box using our current delivery system. But how do we get the prevention providers, the treatment providers, to think more creatively and to take more responsibility for the overall value of, you know, when we're writing a check for care, to take more responsibility for the overall value. I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Very much so, and very much sets the table of where we're heading over the next couple of years. Other questions for Dan?
And I'd love to be involved in if I can be helpful at all to assess any providers or drafting up an RFP. But you know, Gary, you're a leading edge of this. You know, just in our conversation at breakfast, I don't know that I can bring anything more to the table that you already don't know. But
other questions?
Pat, if I may, I can go back and answer Gary's question about the scoring.
Sure.
And then also about general what's happening with behavioral health integration in Kansas. Brandon with Sunflower could probably do a presentation on that, because that's one of his areas of focus at Sunflower, is doing different behavioral health integration with a lot of like FQHCs and whatnot and safety net clinics. But that's a step in the right direction. So maybe he could present on how that stands in the state as a way to start. But on the scoring matrix, so we didn't in the actual matrix include, you know, things about the continuum of care or those kind of specific strategy kind of things. I think we could do that in the future for sure. I think that would be good, but it will be in the summary reports for you all to look at. And some reviewers did consider that. They're like, oh, well, this one's only doing one strategy, this one's doing 5. You know, how does that carry weight in the scoring, those kind of things. So I think you guys can have those discussions during the meeting as well. All of the strategies that they're addressing will be listed in the reports. So you'll be able to see kind of how many different strategies they're trying to implement with their proposals. So that might be something you guys consider during the meeting. And then with the integration, that was a strategy. So integrating behavioral health care into primary care and other healthcare settings was one of our allowable strategies. So I think we have some proposals associated with that, which is good. And then stigma, which was mentioned, was a priority element for all applications. So if they're addressing stigma, they got a priority kind of tick mark. So just to note things that we've been talking about.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Other questions or comments? Dan, thank you for taking time this morning, and we look forward to having you back and furthering this conversation. It's certainly of great interest to me. And just thinking about our previous conversation and several comments this morning about the integration, at a population level, we know we can't solve the world's problems, but in a sense, our test box is the state of Kansas, and kind of intrigues me about maybe the integration, certainly at the primary physician office, but maybe even working with the state school board to see if we can integrate, just like they did physical education in the 60s, mental health education at a very early age, I think would go a long ways with lessening the stigma tied to mental health and substance use disorder in particular. So look forward to working on all of this. Thank you, Dan, again. And
Thank all of you for all of your work in this area. I know it's me, like almost everybody on here, have been directly impacted with my, children, grandchildren, siblings, and substance abuse disorder. It's really good work, and I encourage you and thank you so much for all that you guys are doing to get together and give your time in this area. It is right now, it feels like a runaway freight train, but hopefully that some of your investments that you guys have will have an impact not only in the state of Kansas, but across the whole country. So thank you. I'm going to drop that. Thank you all.
yeah, thank you, Dan.
Yep.
Thanks, Dan.
Well, we will move on to number 7. I will mention that Krista's reached out to Colorado. They have an innovation challenge and wanted to get some more information exactly what they're doing. So when we get that information, we'll pass it out to you. That might help, guide and direct us as we go forward. The item 7, the next couple of meetings that we will have, and we might even, we'll just see how the process goes. We might have to put another meeting instead of, every once a month, we might put an interim meeting in there, so to speak, as we get to looking at the RFPs. We'll just see if we need that time, and we'll certainly look for guidance from all of you, and also find a time that works for all or for most of us. We a couple of meeting reschedules in advance that I wanted to bring to your attention and see primarily if both of these changes would fit into your schedules, and that was moving September's meeting from the 8th, which would be the 2nd Friday, to the 3rd Friday to the 15th. And then also in November, because of the holidays, we were talking about a different meeting schedule there as well, looking at maybe the first week in November, the 3rd of November. So any conflicts, problems with either of those changes? Okay, good. We'll go ahead and change those, and we'll get that out to you. And then, as I mentioned, we'll wait till our meeting here in August, August 11th, I believe is the date, and see how that date goes. We, with these Zoom meetings, we've been able to conclude them fairly, make them fairly short, an hour or two. But I'm pretty sure we'll go at least till after lunch and maybe into the afternoon. But we can kind of monitor it and see if the wish of the board is to maybe fit another meeting in there if we need to, or not. One other item I've been, and this is kind of a small thing, but it's always been, it's one of those little splinters in my that keep bugging me about the reimbursement to the board. You guys do sacrifice your time and efforts and bring a lot of expertise and to be reimbursed for your, at least your mileage, or if you have a hotel or meals involved. And so it got held up. I thought it would be a nothing thing in the legislature, and most of you have been around the legislature to know that I don't know why I even thought that. There's there've been many things that seem like they'd be nothing things, but there is some concern about this would be setting a precedent. So I went to legislative research. It appears that most committees and boards are reimbursed at some level. So I'm getting that factualized, if that's the right term. And then also concerned that maybe some of our members would be double dipping. I think we polled the committee. I think one of our committee is perhaps reimbursed by whatever entity they represent, but most of us are not. So again, that's a little minor thing, but we'll probably look at introducing legislation as we come upon this new year. I'm pretty certain there was an initiative, and this is what we tried to attach reimbursement to, another bill that allowed for-profit entities, not just nonprofits, to participate in the grant process. It did not become law in the sense that it's there forever, but it was provided for in a proviso, which technically are 1 year, becomes law. So from July the 1st, for-profit entities can participate for the funding, and then that will cease unless a permanent legislation is passed. So we'll probably work with whomever and get all of that rolled into one bill. So that's probably more information than you're needing, but that is the change in dates, the potential adding of another meeting, and then potential legislation. So that's all I have for now. Any questions or comments from the board on anything from today, or things you'd like to see going forward? I know there was some a request for maybe an update on the world of opioid prevention and treatment, and the effect that it's having. Several of our people that we reached out to, either there was a conflict that their entity was presenting or had a proposal before us, or that there was a conflict in their time. So we'll look forward to doing that as we go forward. Other
George.
comments or questions?
Chair George, this is Sarah Kaler, and I wonder about the legislation that you were talking about regarding reimbursement of mileage. Is there something that individuals from the committee can help you out with? And then second part of the question is, did you find support from leadership with this particular legislation?
Yeah, there really was, but for a state senator that I think, I kind of blame myself a little bit because I didn't think there'd be any objection at all. And then those that have been around the legislative process, once you incite some sort of questions, then wasn't that prepared to answer those questions. So that's why I've gone back to legislative research and got some facts. So yes, appreciate your comment, Sarah, about I guess volunteering to reach out, and that probably would be good when the session starts back up in January. Perhaps just letting your, maybe whoever your state senator or representative know that, hey, this is coming down, and just to be aware of it. So I'll plan on maybe disseminating that and making some ask of the committee when that comes around.
And I have one quick question it's probably for Krista. In the board portal, like I've looked at all the different applicants, if we signed a conflict waiver and we put a specific applicant on there as our conflict, I assume then we don't see them in the board portal. Is that the way that it works?
Correct. It should be.
Okay.
If you see one in there that was a conflict, let us know. We might have missed something, but yes, Kelly took all of the lists and made sure there's like a checkbox on the back end where if there is a conflict and she selects yes, it should be hidden from you.
Great, thank you.
Other questions or comments? Well, thanks to all of the support staff. Thanks to the board members. Certainly appreciate your time and efforts, and look forward to continuing our quest to make a difference here in the state of Kansas. So have a wonderful weekend, and we will resume soon. Thank you. I'll adjourn the meeting.
See you, everyone.